Hi, this is Chris German from the Apartment Dealer, and the video you're about to watch is from our most recent Apartment Owners Educational Luncheon. Now, this is a live event where I bring together professionals from the areas of real estate law, taxation, market forecasting, commercial lending, and all the rest to update and educate the landlords what's changed essentially over the course of the last year, or maybe since our last live event. And then also give the landlords an opportunity to ask questions that are meaningful to them, those questions that are specific to their own situation. And they receive an answer given the individuals in the room that's multifaceted, and they walk away that much more empowered. So let's jump to that video now. We have been at this now for about 14 years. We've had several thousand multifamily investors, landlords like you, come through our educational event, and we're very humbled to be able to have helped that way because, again, we're not in affiliation with any trade association. Apartment Owners Association, I'm a member, they do great work, but this is separate of that. This is something that starting in 2009, I developed to assist my clients who had questions. If you think back to 2009, that's a time that we affectionately call the Great Real Estate Recession. And my clients had questions that I necessarily couldn't answer as the realtor in the room. So I thought, why not bring together the professionals that could, real estate attorneys, tax consultants, market forecasters, and my clients, and we all converged on a small steakhouse in Arcadia. And over the next hour and a half, my clients got to ask the professionals those questions that were most pressing to them. Going forward, we continue to have that event annually, then biannually, because there was so much demand for the event, to where we are today, where we essentially open it up to the apartment market at large, and you've been invited to be part of this event because you own at least one multifamily property that's in our area of service. We do it that way so that when we get to the market data portion, it really speaks to you as opposed to having owners come from all over. So I have been a part of about 300 multifamily transactions, more than 300 now actually. That's representing landlords like you in the purchase and sale of multifamily properties. Many of my clients are in the room today that we've been through multiple transactions together. But I think more importantly is the fact that my wife and I own a portfolio of multifamily properties ourselves that we self-manage to this day. And we've gone through the 1031 exchange process and so forth, so we have that real life experience. Just like the speakers that you'll hear from today, who are also investors themselves, it's just not a textbook answer from a trade show that you're getting. It's real life experience being a landlord, especially in today when we essentially have a target on our back because we're landlords and because we own multifamily properties. Now, over the course of these 300 transactions, what I've come to learn is that multifamily done incorrectly is going to give you three things. It's going to drain you of your personal resources and money, it's going to drain you of your personal time, and it's going to rob you of your peace of mind. Multifamily done correctly, and what I've learned from the largest multifamily investors here locally, because they're my personal clients, is that it should mean positive cash flow today, a growth of your wealth over time, and should eventually build for you what I now call the financial legacy. And this financial legacy is predicated upon three pillars. And this idea developed, again, after going through transaction time and time again, seeing those that excelled at a high level, seeing those that didn't do so well with their multifamily properties. You can't imagine how many investors I speak to that say something like this: Chris, we'd like to go on more vacations, but we would hate to be away and then we get a call from one of the tenants. And their life is dictated that way. To me, that's not excelling at a high level, so I return to the financial legacy, three pillars. The first pillar of which is maximization. Maximization is the idea of, hey, look, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Maybe you don't need to sell and do a 1031 exchange and look at different strategies. There's a time and point when that's necessary. But let's first take a look at our portfolio. And can we do anything to maximize the value from within by increasing our rental rates, which would then increase our overall cash flow, increasing the value of the property, giving us that much more equity to then work with as we continue to build and compound our portfolio from there.
If your property is inside the city of Los Angeles, you are currently controlled by two moratoriums, the city of Los Angeles and the county of Los Angeles. If your property is in the county of Los Angeles, but outside of the city of Los Angeles, you're controlled by only one moratorium. That's the county's moratorium. Many of you have probably already heard the county's moratorium is now set to expire on December 31st. All right, there's some nuances to it. The only word of caution I will tell you is that last January, the county did vote on an opportunity to extend that moratorium through the July of next year, so July of 2023. So even though it has, it's actually kind of a misbelief or misunderstanding that it has been voted to expire December 31st. It hasn't technically been voted to expire December 31st, but it looks like that's where we're going, and I'm pretty confident. What has been voted on is that the county is going to put out a public information campaign or a public service announcement campaign. That has been approved. And that campaign is to basically notify the public, including landlords and tenants, that it is their intention to expire the moratorium on December 31st. So that's the county's moratorium. I will say that in the county, how many of you have a current eviction going on in Los Angeles County? Okay, is it for those of you, it's only a few of you, is it for non-payment of rent? Good. So that's also been a common misunderstanding throughout this last 2.5 years, is that I can't evict my tenants for non-payment of rent. That is not accurate. Okay, you can. There's a lot of ways to do it, a lot of ways to go about it. I don't have the time today to go into all of that, but if you want to talk about that, I'll be here after I'm done speaking. So the county moratorium, the only thing that's really going to remain in place right now that really is a prohibition is no-fault evictions. You really can't do a no-fault eviction in the county right now. But again, like I said, that will be changing as of December 31st. So that leaves us with the city's moratorium. And are there any of you who have the property in the city of Los Angeles right now currently doing an eviction? For only one person. For non-payment of rent? Okay, so she's also doing an eviction for non-payment of rent in the city of Los Angeles. And I've been here and explained this many, many times. And I noticed when Chris asked how many of you have been here before, a lot of you, this was your first time. Unfortunately, there's so much to talk about. I can't really go into the details. But even the city of Los Angeles' moratorium, throughout this last 2.5 years, we have filed close to 3,000 evictions since COVID hit in Los Angeles County, and the majority of those have been in the city of Los Angeles. We've had almost zero pushback from the city attorneys, from the Los Angeles Housing Department, from anybody really. As long as you did it right and documented everything, you were right. Let's talk more locally. Let's talk about Los Angeles. When the county announced back in January that they were going to have a three-tiered phase out of their moratorium, what they really meant was not actually very hidden. It was on the last page of the moratorium, and it said, we want to continue this moratorium until we can put all these tenant protections in place that we haven't been able to put in place prior to COVID. So remember, all these tenant protections came about as a result of this emergency situation, the pandemic. And it allowed the governments, specifically LA County and LA City, and governments all over the country, in fact, but it allowed them to take police powers over your properties. And now that the pandemic is really going away, everybody, Fauci, the president, they all admit it's an endemic now. The localities don't want to release that power. And what I find ironic is that they're not hiding it. They put it right in their documents. We don't want to give this up until we get these tenant protections in place. So what are we talking about as far as tenant protections? I'm going to give you some of the examples, not all of them. So the first one, which is really scary to me, is they want to set a threshold. This is the city of Los Angeles and the county talking about this right now. They want to set a threshold for non-payment of rent, beneath which you will not be able to evict the tenants. And if you think about it for a second, what they're saying is, if the tenant owes you less than this much, then you can't evict them. Okay, that is already in place in other areas of the country, Washington, D.C., Oregon. For example, Washington, D.C., which has the highest amount, is $600. Can you imagine what the city and county of Los Angeles, the threshold they want to set? Hold on to your seats. $10,000. So in other words, they want the tenant to be in arrears by $10,000 before you are allowed to file an eviction. Okay, now it gets better. It gets better, as in a lot worse, badder. Yes, exactly. So as you may recall, throughout COVID, every single state law that came out specifically said it is the legislative intent that we do not want these tenants evicted for non-payment of rent during COVID. We want you to go through small claims court. In fact, every single law said we are increasing the small claims amount, the jurisdictional amount, so there will be no cap on it, right? Everybody remember that? If you don't, that's what they said. Trust me on it. I read it thousands of times. All right, so just this past weekend, Governor Newsom signed a bill into effect. By the way, I'm sorry, I skipped a part. The reason the city and county are choosing $10,000 as the threshold is because under normal circumstances, that is the jurisdictional limit in small claims court. What they're trying to do is push landlords into small claims court to go after unpaid rent rather than evicting the tenants. Here's the problem. Governor Newsom just signed a bill into law, I believe it was Saturday. That law now changed the wage garnishment laws so that you can no longer seek unpaid rent through a wage garnishment, even if you have a judgment. So what does that mean? It means you can sue your tenants in small claims court and get a judgment for $10,000. It's absolutely worthless. So you are now left, because your tenants, I mean, I hate to say this, but it's just the facts. Your tenants don't have assets, all right? They might have a car, but for the most part, they don't have assets. The only assets they have are their paycheck and their bank accounts, which are the statistics in this country right now say the average person in this country does not have enough money in the bank to afford a $700 emergency. So they have no assets. They have no bank accounts. So simultaneously, the hand that giveth taketh away, right? You have to go through small claims, and yet if you do that, rather than evicting, that judgment will be worthless. It's absolutely worthless. So what's realistically going to happen? I don't know if $10,000 is going to be approved, but I do suspect it will be probably 2 to 3 months worth of rent at average market rates. That will get approved. So you will now be limited on your remedies and what you can do.
For every 1% in rate, 12% in buying power, which means you have to increase your rents 12% to keep up with it. Okay? Notice the first screen I gave you, where most of these high-end, aggressive investors are doing now. They're getting cash for keys, they're renovating, they're building it up. Now, when you're renovating and building it up, your market, and Chris will probably talk about this, but your market usually is somebody young who doesn't want to buy yet, who wants to be a little more mobile. Back in my era, they were called yuppies. I have no idea what they're called today. But my point is, that's the kind of tenant you want. Makes more income than he's going to need. He's not living off 50% off his rent income as far as ratio is concerned. So you got to keep up. You got to be aggressive. So not only are the rates against you at a 12%, 1% for 12%, remember that. That's how much you're losing. But then you have other inflationary factors, and you have the city, and you have the IRS, and you have this, and you have that. So there is a strong need to play aggressive offense, okay? If you don't have cash reserves, get them now, okay? Got to be able to weather storms. You have to weather storms. You have to capitalize on the money and the position you are. Get aggressive.
Did something happen in 2020 that changed all of our lives? Well, sure. And interestingly enough, COVID, aside of making us run out of toilet paper and put on bodysuits, brought the saving grace the market needed. If you were at this event, October of 2019, not only myself, but Bruce Norris, who dives way in the weeds when it comes to all the market data, said the market is shifting. Sales are off, prices are dropping. You talk to a 1031 exchange company. That year I interviewed Greg Burns, who's also in the room with us here today. He's going to be a part of our Q&A panel. We sat down, and it's still up on YouTube. He'll say, yeah, the volume of transactions was dropping coming out of 2019. But in 2020, we get COVID. What did COVID bring with it? A ton of cash, either right or wrong, depending who you ask, low interest rates, And then rental rates took off. As people were told you can work from home, people left West Hollywood, downtown LA, started migrating east for affordability, for more space. Rental rates took off. So 2020, we get low interest rates, we get high rental rates. If you watched my video I recorded at the beginning of the year, you know that in 2021, we saw historically the highest growth we had ever seen in rental rates. And 2022 was poised to be the second year on record with the highest growth in rental rates. So the question then becomes, is the bump that we've seen, in multifamily, I would say we didn't see as big of a leap in values as single family did. Now single family is going through a huge correction. But we definitely got to take advantage of the rental rates and the interest rates. Now, when we talk about growth, of course, we're talking about either a cash out refinance, 1031 exchange. I've done both. So what's possible? My client owned this 10-unit building in the city of Montebello. Now, when I came into their life, this is where they were. Because they don't know me from anyone, I'm just the guy on YouTube. Okay. They said, Chris, this sounds all great, but you don't understand. There's no tenants like our tenants. Even though these tenants were on the welfare plan to pay rent. Some on the 1st, some on the 5th, and some on the 10th. Some of you know how that goes. Even though they paid that way, they still believed that every other building had tenants worse than theirs. They also thought, well, everyone else is a slumlord, so if I go to buy another building, I'm just going to buy somebody else's problem. Third, well, because they had bought 2 decades prior, buildings free and clear, how can we go from no loan to a loan and increase our cash flow? Better yet, our basis is so low, how can we do a 1031 exchange, pay the increased property tax, and our cash flow is still going to be more? All valid questions. And I said, look, they're tied up in the emotion of the property. I have the liberty of looking from the outside in, and I said, let's just look at the math. They ended up doing a 1031 exchange, buying the 17-unit building in Baldwin Park. That's a 70% increase in terms of the number of units owned. That is key, because tell me, had they held on to 10 units, how long would it have taken to raise 17 rents on a 10-unit building? Go ahead, I'll give you time. So by adding the additional 7 doors, and especially in rent control didn't exist then, and you raise rent every year, year after year, on those 7 additional units, that 17 unit will dwarf anything that the 10 unit can provide. Immediately they saw a 31% upside in net cash flow. Just day one, not even raising rents. Their net cash flow after the new taxes, taking on the mortgage, repairs and maintenance and what have you, 31%. What happens to interest rates going forward? If the 2 saving graces to the market, and the only reason we got a catalyst was interest rates and rental rates, and we're going to lose rental rates, what then about interest rates? Well, they've already gone up. The interest rate today, the average interest rate, if you want to purchase a multifamily property, is 5.25% to 5.5%. It was just a few months ago that we were less than 4%, and here we are. You have to ask yourself, do you think interest rates will continue to climb? Why is that so important? Well, let's take a look here. I'm using $1 million property, 40% down payment, $400,000. Income of $72,000, so that gives us a 4.2 cap rate, which I'm sure we can agree that's about an average deal. At an interest rate of 4.5%, gives us a cash flow of $55.19. This is our baseline example. Let's now raise the rate from 4.5% to 5%. Same building, same income, same expenses. We simply raised the rate 0.5%. What just happened? The income went from $55.19 to $33.49. That's 39% less net cash flow for a buyer. Raise it another 0.5%, from 5 to 5.5. You go from $33.49 to $11.19. That's an 80% reduction in net cash flow, and we've only got up 1 point. Well, this is the interest rate that we sit at today. So if you had evaluations done, appraisals done last year, it's a new market. Last year, they would have been quoting you 4.25. We're sitting at 5.5. Take the rate to 6%. The cash flow now goes negative from $55.19 to $11.68. It's now, the buyer has lost or is negative 121% cash flow versus where they would have been with the current rates. Well, then in turn, what could that possibly do to values? Let's take the same scenario. $1 million building, same income, what have you. We're focusing on the cash flow, 5519. At some point, buyers are going to say, enough is enough. I'm not going to put 80% down on a building. The price needs to adjust in order to meet my cash flow. Let's take the rate from 4.5 to 5. You see the cash flow stayed the same, 5519. What didn't stay the same? The price. Go left. It dropped from $1 million to $957 in order to get us the same cash flow. Our price just went down $42,000. Raise the rate another half point. Go left. The price just dropped from $1 million to $916,800. That's an $83,200 difference in price. Take it another half point. Our building, which was once worth $1 million, is now worth $878,800. Based upon what am I basing this on? The fact that if buyers say, if I'm going to deal with rent control, that's only tightening, and all the reasons why you're selling, I'm now taking that on. But in return for my risk, I want a certain reward. That's how much of a difference that we could see in values. Again, I'm not suggesting the market's going to see a big shift. I'm not an economist. But I want you to put 2 and 2 together. We looked at the data. 2019, the market was already shifting. It was time. It was a decade. Then we get this anomaly of COVID. It brings into the marketplace a ton of cash and rising interest rates. But the market was set to correct. The point is, if we've lost interest rates and if we lose rental rates, what else will hold the market up at the values that we've seen of late? What else can we point to? And who knows? Maybe buyers will be so desperate given inflation. And speaking of inflation, I have to apologize. We had to make the coffee cup smaller this year because of Biden's quote-unquote transitory inflation. This is the new size of your coffee cup, so I apologize for that.
Since you have the lease agreement with the tenants, with the rent stabilization that came about at the time when it did, we had tenants that was already in the residence. So don't that contract falls under the laws that was in existence at that time when the contract existed under the Constitution?
No, the laws supersede, they take over, and they say whatever, if you had a contract that said there are rent escalators or what have you, if the property is subject to rent control, then the law controls.
But this was my understanding under Santabella versus New York, 1972 case, along with United States Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, and California Constitution, Article 1, Section 10. Both state that Congress nor state legislatures can bring any new laws that would impede a contract.
Yes, and that argument for the sanctity of a contract, I think, is a great argument. We used to have those arguments in law school. And it is defensible, it's reasonable, and if the Supreme Court decides to decide about it, that's great. But let me tell you what not one of you in the room wants to be in the Supreme Court. You don't want to be in the Superior Court, you don't want to be in the Appellate Court. Your better bet is to go along to get along. Do not stand on principles, stand on business principles, on moral principles, on ethical principles, but your ethics, your morals, don't expect others to adhere to yours. You do the right thing, you maintain the building properly, you follow the laws and go along. Let someone else, perhaps you, sir, act as the person who's going to be the litigant to make good law for all of us. And for the people who know these things, as you've obviously researched and read and you understand it, I hope you fight for all of us. For the rest of you, I'd encourage you, just own your buildings and make a bunch of money.
A lot of people are moving all their properties out of California, like Bruce Norris and other people. Why are you staying in California?
I am in California. We own, I think, probably 300 units or so, 280, 290, 300 units in California. I have absolutely no plans to sell them. When I hear people say that they have sold and they're getting out of California, to me, all that says is that down the road, in another year or two, 3 at the most, I'm going to be buying apartments in California like crazy because I'm going to have buying opportunities, because as there's a cascade of panic, there will be more people selling.
Yes.
And we will see a situation where instead of having 10 potential buyers for a single property, we'll have 10 properties for one buyer to pick from. So to me, the tide goes in, the tide comes out, then it comes back in again, then it goes back out again. And when you have a negative overall attitude toward California property, all that happened, for those of you who are old enough to remember and were involved in real estate, 1989 to 1994, nobody wanted California property. Everybody, I see 4 heads so far nodding their heads with me. Nobody wanted California property. Everybody wanted to sell. And all we did all through 90 to 94, we bought and bought and bought, and those are the properties we own today. I would say there's no reason that, look, if all the people, all the humans are moving out of California and there won't be any people here anymore, it's going to look like, Antarctica, only 72 degrees year-round temperature, fine. But that's not happening. The employment bone is connected to the apartment bone. And as long as there are jobs, and there will be in California, plenty of reason to make plenty of money in apartment buildings. Now, you have to be ready to deal with the regulations. You have to be ready to be in the business of doing this. But if you do it, or you have property management who can do it and do it well, there's no reason not to make all the money you can make in a place that works like this.
And how do I prove nuisance in an eviction?
Okay, good question, because nuisance evictions have gone up about 600% in my firm in the last 8 to 9 years. That's crazy. First, let's talk about what is a nuisance. California has about 3 different definitions for a nuisance. Essentially, it's anything that's offensive to the senses. All right, so it could be a smell, it could be somebody who's obnoxious, it could be noise, it could be a police raid on the property. There's a lot of different things that fall into a nuisance. So what I encourage everybody to do is, I usually take the most conservative approach to a nuisance eviction, and I apply it to every city. So for example, in the city of Los Angeles, if that's where your property is located, they would require the names of the witnesses, the date and time of the events of the nuisance. So what I always tell the clients is, look, start documenting the nuisance behavior. All right, document it every time something occurs, and then you start off with a warning letter to them. Hey, on this date, at this time, you did this. On this date, at this time, I've warned you about this. And then, at some point, in fact, in most modern leases, there is a provision in there that actually defines nuisance, and it'll say that the tenant is not permitted to create or maintain a nuisance on the property. Like I said, there's 3 different definitions, and it's a very, very broad umbrella for nuisance. But if you document all the behavior, the dates, times, witnesses, and you send that letter, they're actually not that difficult to prevail on, believe it or not. Most of the time, you can document it with a video camera, you can document with sound recordings. Most importantly would be the neighboring tenants sending you emails or texts. Hey, this is what's going on. This guy's out there, harassing me. He's broken my car window. He's slashed my tires, whatever it is. But it's all about the evidence. You have to walk into court, and this is true of any eviction. You have to walk into court being able to prove your case. Again, this is, it's funny. One of the most important things I can tell all landlords right now is review your leases. You heard me talk about this a little bit earlier. If you don't review your attorney's fees provision in there, you could end up in a lot of litigation you don't want to be in. If you review your lease and you cap out that attorney's fees at $500 to $1,000, all these tenants' rights groups will bluff you. They will say they want a jury trial. They'll hit you with discovery. But in the end, they will end up settling with you because they're not going to go to a jury trial for $500 in the vast majority of cases. So review your attorney's fees provision first. Change it if you need to, and that is no longer an easy thing to do, so call my office if you want to know if you can change it. Once you've got that cap in place, you can start documenting all the behaviors right away, but get the cap in place before you send a letter, before you send a notice, then send a warning letter. Then if it doesn't stop after that, go ahead and file the eviction.